Hello, my name is Bruce Cuthbert of AuroraClicks.com, and I'm here today with Frank Klees of the Progressive Conservative Party. We're here to interview Frank for the upcoming election that will be held on Thursday, October 6th. What we're going to do today is go through the campaign of the Progressive Conservative Party, let Frank talk a little bit about it, and ask him some questions. To start with, I'd like to welcome Frank and thank him for his attendance today. And start out by talking about Changebook, which is the conservative platform. Frank, maybe we could start by just getting a little background on yourself and your personal background and the background of your life as a politician.
Glad to do that, and thank you for this opportunity, Bruce. I know that it's this kind of format that people enjoy because it really gives people, I think, an opportunity to get to know who the candidate is, something about them, and to be challenged as well. I'm looking forward to having a discussion about the issues, of course.
I am too.
I've had the privilege of serving Newmarket and Aurora as the MPP for the last 4 years. Since 1995, however, as many of your viewers will know, I've represented 3 different ridings throughout York Region. And that's basically because of the change in boundaries that takes place when there's such high population growth as we've had here. Throughout that time, I have really made an effort, and my focus has been to help to make our community the best place to live, to work, and to raise a family. And I'm proud of my record of accomplishment. You know, it's no secret, Bruce, that we have one of the world-class cardiac care centers here in York Region in South Lake, as well as a world-class cancer center. And I worked hard to ensure that those services were here in our community. As a Minister of Transportation, I signed off on the first $50 million. That was the first major investment in York Region's Viva Transit system. And there's still much more to be done. Prior to coming to politics in 1995, when I was first elected, as I mentioned, I was in business. I have a business career that spans some 25 years. I started off in the financial services business. Then in 1989, with 2 other partners, founded the Municipal Gas Corporation. That was a business that we built from the ground up. We had a blank sheet of paper, and we conceived of the business, built it up. And when I sold my interest in 1997, we were doing business in 3 provinces, Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec. We had some 50,000 customers, many of them institutional, municipal governments. And it taught me something about this great province and this great country of ours. That if you have a vision, you have a goal, you actually can realize that vision and that goal. And so I feel that that's an important background to what I'm doing now. In the course of being in business, you come up against a lot of challenges and some difficult times. And you have to know how to cope and deal with that. And actually it's positioned me well because I've been able to provide advice based on my personal experience to a lot of people. To a lot of people in business who are facing similar challenges and just average people who have the day-to-day challenges in life. I'm fortunate. I have a wonderful family, married to Jane for almost 30 years now. 2 adult children. My daughter is 33, my son is 29. And again, you know, if you go through life as a parent, as you well know, there are challenges that you find. And so again, I'm able to empathize with people who come into my office when they have challenges in their family, trying to access services. I know what it's like. And so that, I think, has positioned me well to do the job that I'm called to do and that I'm honored to do as the MPP for this area. Okay.
As a family man and as an entrepreneur then, you've experienced change in your life, obviously. The platform that the Conservatives have come up with is called Changebook. Obviously, with the McGuinty government being in power for 8 years, you're looking for change, hence the name Changebook. We'll go through that policy platform, and I'd like to start with one of the major components of that policy, and that is tax relief for families. Let's start with talking about the a tax relief through income tax sharing for families. If you could just elaborate a little bit on how you're going to allow for income tax sharing between families.
Glad to do that. And just before I do that, I think it's important that people understand where the policy recommendations and positions of Change Book came from. We conducted the largest consultation ever conducted in the province of Ontario. And we asked people to have their say. In fact, the survey itself was called Have Your Say Ontario. And people here in Newmarket and Aurora were able to provide their input. And so based on that survey, one of the key issues that came out was the very difficult time that people were having making ends meet, and as a result of the tax burden. And so we responded to that. And one of those areas, as you point out, is the ability for couples to share income. So on the first $50,000 of income, we're going to allow couples to actually share that first $50,000 of taxable income, and the result of that will be that the tax rate will actually effectively be lowered for both. That means it's going to leave more money in people's pockets that they can then spend on their particular needs that they have for the cost of living. A lot of couples make the decision, for example, that the mom's going to stay home and be a full-time mom. Well, if in fact then you continue to have only one income earner, the way our tax system works now is that the husband or the wife, depending on who is going to stay at home or go to work, is going to have a high income tax rate. By being able to shift off some of that income, whatever amount it is on that first $50,000 of taxable income, we're going to lower that tax rate on the principal wage earner, and as a result, you have more disposable income for that family.
So what you're saying is that for the first $50,000 in a case where one of the spouses doesn't work, you can split that income so each of them would be taxed at the rate of $25,000?
That's precisely the case, yes.
Okay. Now, what are the other components of your reduced tax rate on families?
We're going to reduce the actual income tax rate by 5% on the first $75,000 of taxable income. That applies to everyone across the board. Again, the rationale there is that when people look at their paycheck at the end of a month, there's not much left there. And we want to make sure that there is more disposable income. We hope to increase that allowance over time as our financial situation in this province improves. We want to continue to lower the income tax rate, but it's a start, and we think it's an important one. In addition to that, we're going to look at the very essentials. You know, I have seniors that come into my office almost every week. I see 2 or 3, whether they be couples or singles, coming into my office and saying, Mr. Klees, I'm having a hard time making ends meet. And it starts with the hydro bill. Hydro bills have increased by some 76% over the last 8 years. And people with smart meters can see as much as a 150% increase in their energy costs. People can't cope with that. We think it's important that we provide relief there. And so we're going to do that. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to remove the HST, the provincial portion of the HST, off of the hydro bills. We're also going to remove the HST from all of the home heating bills that people have. Some people may be heating with heating oil, propane, whatever that utility is, natural gas, for example. We're going to remove the provincial portion of the HST from that. If you see your hydro bill, Bruce, you'll see a line item there that is referred to as the debt retirement charge. In some cases, that can be more than the actual energy that people use. We're going to remove that as well, because that was initially put there to pay off a $7.8 billion stranded debt from the old Ontario Hydro. And it was put on there in 2002. Everyone should participate and did participate in paying that down. Here's the problem. That $7.8 billion was paid off some 2.5 years ago. And even if you add interest to that, it has already been paid off. In the last budget that Dalton McGuinty brought forward, he told Ontarians that he's going to continue to charge that debt retirement charge right through to 2017. Why? Well, we're saying that's fundamentally wrong. That debt's been already paid for. We're going to unplug that as well. And with regard to smart meters, we're going to unplug that. We don't think it's right for the government to tell people in this province when they should do their laundry or when they can use their hydro. Some people may like the structure of a rate structure for time of use. We think that people should have that choice. You know, there are a lot of jurisdictions that have time of use metering, but they give the consumer the choice of whether they want to be on that. And we think it's right to give people choice, so we will, both for business, small business, as well as residential users. They'll have the choice of whether they want to use that smart meter or not.
That was one of the questions I brought up in the Aurora debate, and that is one of the questions that we'll talk again about a little later on when we come to the whole GST and the energy topics.
Sure.
Getting to that, then we may as well discuss that now. Before we get to that, one of the things that your platform also talks about is the eco-taxes, that you would permanently eliminate those. You also talk about doubling the caregiver tax credit. Can you expand a little bit on doubling of the tax credit for caregivers?
First of all, with regard to the eco-tax, it's one of those sneaky fees that were inserted kind of in the cover of night. It was right after the HST came in that we found out that literally thousands of household items that hadn't had this tax on it before would be rolled out with a tax. And so we just think, again, it's one of those things that's nickel and diming people, and it's time to stop that. So we're going to remove those eco-taxes and give people some more relief. With regard to doubling the caregiver tax credit, you know, we want people, seniors especially, to be able to stay in their homes as long as possible. And so we are providing the kind of tax relief that we've been talking about here to reduce their costs and so that they can stay in their homes. But for a lot of seniors, especially those who are frail, they have illnesses, maybe they simply can't. Right now, often, the only option they've got is to go into long-term care homes. But the problem is, there's a waiting list of about 23,000 seniors waiting to get into long-term care homes right across this province, and thousands here in York Region alone. I think a lot of families would be willing to have their elderly parents or parent or someone with a disability living with them and being the caregiver, but that's expensive. And under the current structure, there isn't enough recognition of the expenses that a caregiver incurs when they're looking after one of their family. And so we're going to double the caregiver tax credit that again will allow the income earners in that household to reduce their taxable amount of their own income, so that leaves them with more disposable income in their families, which can go then to cover off some of those expenses by having an elderly person or parent or someone with a disability living in their home.
And for the public's benefit, what amount or what would that amount to?
Basically, that will result in depending, again, you know, it depends on what the actual income is that someone has and what tax bracket they're in, but that can range anywhere from $600 to $1,500 a year, which is pretty significant.
Okay. A while back, the Liberals proposed providing unemployment insurance. Just to be clear, this is a provincial credit they would get, not something that is of a federal nature, such as unemployment insurance. It's very easy to offer unemployment insurance when doesn't come out of the provincial coffers and is not something that a commitment that a provincial government could keep.
Right.
Okay. Speaking of the energy bills, we've talked about the home heating, the hydro bills, the debt retirement charge, and unplugging the smart meters. You recently had a public, well, not a public event, but you had a press conference with a company in town here regarding that very fact. We referred to the fact that it affects individuals, but in this case, it affected a businessman in town.
Yeah.
One of the things that drives the economy is small businesses. It is very difficult for a business who runs their business during the day to turn off their energy during hours of operation. Explain for our audience why that's so significant for an operation such as the businessman that contacted you.
Well, Bruce, this is again, we believe, a very good example of how disconnected the McGuinty government has become with the reality of what's going on in our province. So the announcement now came out to businesses across Aurora that effective with the November billing date, they would be placed on this time of use metering. In Newmarket, that will come into effect in December, and so the January bills will now reflect the new time of use metering. And the way this works is that in an effort, in the words of the McGuinty government, to help conserve or really force people to conserve, they want people to use more of their energy demand in off-peak hours. Obviously, in the day, people are working, businesses are going, and so there's more demand on our system, on our electricity system, during those what are referred to as peak hours. And so what the McGuinty government has done is increase the rate that you pay for electricity during daytime hours, thinking that by increasing the rate, they're going to force businesses and residents to use power in the off-peak hour. Now, here's the problem when it comes to small business. The business that we were in, that I held my press conference in, is a meat shop. He has to keep his refrigerators, his freezers going. His customers come in during the day. They have to keep the lights on. He doesn't have the option to turn the energy consumption down during the day. So automatically, for that business and any other business that's forced to do business during the day, guess what? His energy bill skyrockets by some 30 to 40% without doing anything differently. In this particular case, this business person said to me, Frank, I don't know if I can keep my doors open. You know, this is a fundamental input into my business. I have to use energy. Why is the government of Ontario creating this kind of hardship for me? And all other business, you know, talk to restaurant owners, talk to any other business that just is forced to do their business, and that they do their business during the day. This is a tremendous burden to them. So we've said, we will change that. We will unplug those smart meters for the businesses who want to do that and can, because maybe they can ramp up their production in the evenings or in the off-peak hours. That's great. But I think what we should do, in our position as the PC party of Ontario, is to say, this is a matter of choice. Let's give businesses the choice. Don't force them into this, and let's not drive businesses out of business.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One of the other part of your platforms in regards to the HST that I do have to ask you about is why just the HST on home energy bills? Why, and some people think this is hypocritical, why, if you're against the HST, why just on energy bills?
Well, you know, I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, when the HST was first announced, I made it very clear to my constituents here, I support a more simplified tax system. Who wouldn't? It's much better to have one single tax system as opposed to two. The problem with how the McGuinty government brought this in was that instead of making the rate revenue neutral, they added the provincial tax rate on top of the GST, so that now we have this huge tax burden on everything that we touch in this province. Our recommendation was bring in the HST, but lower the tax rate, level it out, so that it's revenue neutral when you put in that system. Now you get the benefit of a simplified tax system, but you don't hurt consumers by ramping up the cost of everything that they touch. The McGuinty government refused to do that. they loaded up some $3.1 billion of additional revenue by keeping that rate so high. So the question is, well, if you opposed that, and by the way, this was 2 years ago when this started to ramp in, it came in officially last July 1st, why don't you now roll the rate back? Bruce, here's the reason. In addition to loading up all of these tax increases, the McGuinty government has driven our province into such a hole financially that we are now paying $10 billion a year in interest payments on the debt alone. Well, where does that money come from? First of all, he's now put us, Dalton McGuinty has put us into a situation where our provincial debt is $246 billion. You know, when I share that information, even with business groups, people are appalled. They have no idea how bad things have become in this province. So we've got a debt of $246 billion. We've got interest payments of $10 billion a year. Where does the money come from? We're not going to cut back on healthcare. We're not going to cut back on education. These are pillars within our communities and society that we need to preserve. Now, what we will do, we will reduce the size of government, because over that same period of time, Dalton McGuinty has increased the size of government by 80% in 8 years. Our economy grew by 10%. Well, something's out of kilter here. What we need to do is get a hold of the management of this province. We have to stop this reckless spending, this oppressive taxing, and we have to allow people once again to feel that they can actually live with some sense that they can meet their obligations at the end of the month. So why are we starting by removing the HST from the basics? Home heating, the electricity bills, because that's where everybody in our community is touched by that. You have to be able to turn the lights on. You have to heat your home. That's not a luxury. So we want to at least start by providing relief there, and as the economy gets onto a sounder footing, we want to provide more tax relief to people along the way.
Where else would you rein in government spending?
Well, let's take a look at what's happening here and what has happened over the last 8 years in this province. We have the size of government now, as I mentioned before, has grown by 80%. We have an Ontario public service now that, in our opinion, is bloated. I highly respect our civil servants. Many of them do an excellent job. It's not their fault that Dalton McGuinty has allowed it to grow to the point where it's unmanageable. And so we're going to reduce the size of Ontario Public Service by 20%. By the way, we're going to reduce the size of cabinet as well. We just think there's far too much government in this province today. Now, a lot of that reduction we think we can address and achieve through attrition. We don't think that there have to be any significant cuts to any services. I think it's just a matter that this province has been mismanaged. We're going to ask every ministry, except for health and education, to find 2 cents on the dollar, 2% of their expenditures across the board over the next number of years. We think that's very achievable, and we're going to ensure that that accountability takes place. So, a number of things, Bruce. We're going to start with our own public service and reduce the size of government. We're going to ask that the spending is done in an accountable way and transparent way. We're going to make sure that we cut the waste out of government. You know, this government wasted $1.2 billion on the e-health scandal. That was a perfectly good project. It was a project that was intended to bring electronic health records to every person in this province. We will advance that. But it was the Auditor General who exposed the McGuinty government scandal here. The Auditor General said $1.2 billion was wasted on this project. How? By giving fat contracts to Liberal-friendly consultants, for which we got nothing in return. There are a lot of Liberal consultants who are happy out there, but those were precious tax dollars. that were being used and that were being scandalously distributed to friends of Dalton McGuinty. We're going to stop that. There's another agency that was created strictly by the McGuinty government. They're called Local Health Integration Networks. Their offices are down in Markham here for the Central Local Health Integration Network. You can go and see it. Very nice offices, lots of people. You know what they do? They don't add one iota of health care to our system here in York Region. But you know what those health care integration networks cost us in this province? $300 million a year. That's money that can go to the front lines and deliver health care, and we're going to eliminate those LHINs, as they're called. And we're going to make sure that the tax dollars that we're spending that should go into the healthcare envelope actually go to frontline healthcare. So there are a lot of things that we can do, that we will do, to just bring good stewardship to the government of Ontario.
Okay, hand in hand with that, one of your policies in that area is a small business bill of rights. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Bruce, as we discussed earlier, small businesses create some 80% of the jobs in this province and in this country. And so we believe that small business should be encouraged, should be supported, that government shouldn't be oppressive to small business. It should actually be a partner with small business to create an environment and encourage entrepreneurs to invest in this province and to create jobs. But that hasn't been the case. In the last 8 years, I've had a number of roundtables in this riding. In Newmarket-Aurora, I've called on businesses to come and share with me what some of their biggest challenges are. I heard repeatedly that what businesses are oppressed by is red tape, a lot of regulations that are unnecessary, loaded up with paperwork, inspectors who come in with an attitude, not a customer service attitude, but rather a condescending attitude and a threatening attitude. We're going to change that. And this Small Business Bill of Rights is going to have a number of components to it. It's going to start off with ensuring that we change the culture of how government deals with businesses in this province. Customer service. We want our civil servants to begin to behave once again civilly, to understand that they actually work for the businesses that they're inspecting, that they treat people with respect, that when people go to ask about how to come into compliance, that they're not threatened, they're actually given an opportunity to come into compliance if they happen to be out of compliance. We're going to get rid of the red tape. We're going to appoint a special cabinet minister whose responsibility it's going to be is to reduce the red tape, all that burden that now is really oppressing small businesses. We're going to ensure as well that through that entire process, small businesses will once again have an opportunity to bid on government contracts. There are a lot of businesses who produce product and who produce services who are closed out under the McGuinty government because, for some reason, they just simply don't qualify. We're going to make tendering of contracts open. Every contract that the Government of Ontario enters into, we're going to post on a website. Look, taxpayers have a right to know where their government is spending the money. And so if a ministry enters into a contract with a business to provide a service, why shouldn't the taxpayer see that? Why shouldn't the taxpayer see what the terms and conditions of that contract were? Those are the kinds of things. It's going to be open, transparent, accountable. We're going to ensure that business people in this province know that government is there to help, not to hinder.
One of the other things that you mentioned in Change Book, before we move on much further, is aside from reducing the size of government and reducing the number of people in the civil service, you're also going to look at the way that unions operate. You're going to try and bring their wages, the public sector wages, in line with the private sector. And you're also going to look at the way union dues are collected and spent. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, look, we believe there's a role for unions, obviously, in this province. but we feel that there has been an inequality. We think as a party that the services that are provided through our Ontario Public Service should be competitive, and that when contracts are negotiated for whether it is the Ontario Public Service, whether it's police and fire services throughout the province, that there should be a responsibility and a requirement for arbitrators, for example, to give consideration to the ability to pay. You can't just simply keep ratcheting up contracts and increasing the tax burden without regard as to whether or not the taxpayer can actually pay that. You know, one of the reasons that we have a $246 billion debt is because this government just continues to give people what they're asking for. You know, I've heard my Liberal opponent claim and take great pride in the fact that there hasn't been a single day lost to strikes by teachers in the last 8 years. There's a reason for that, Bruce. The reason is that they bought them off. Everything that's been asked for by the teachers' unions, the McGuinty government has given them. Now, what's the payback? This is another thing that we're going to do. We're going to pass legislation that will make it illegal for unions to assess fees to their union members against their will for money that will then be used in a political campaign. That's wrong. Teachers here in York Region have been assessed a $60 fee that's taken off their paycheck for one purpose only, and that purpose, admitted to by the unions, is to mount a campaign against me here in York Region as the PC candidate, and across the province against Tim Hudak and the Ontario PCs. There are a lot of teachers who've been calling me saying, Frank, I'm livid about this. I don't want my union to take money from my paycheck to support a political cause that I don't support. I support you. Why should I be forced to have my money deducted? We're going to make that illegal. We're not going to allow that. This is Ontario. That is not the way that democracy should work. So, do we support unions? Look, there's a role for unions, but I think they have overreached, and I think it's time to bring them back into line, both on the negotiating for wages side and how they conduct themselves.
Okay, since you brought up teachers, let's talk a little bit about education. The Liberals have promised to reduce education fees by 30%. You have promised to increase the number of apprenticeship opportunities available. I don't see in your platform where you've promised to freeze or reduce tuition fees. Could you expand a little bit on your education policy and answer a straight yes or no? Are you going to reduce or freeze tuition fees?
No, I think that, again, this is very cynical on the part of the McGuinty Liberals. They're the government that have allowed tuition fees to rise every year since they've been in office. And now, 2 weeks before an election, they announced they're going to reduce them by 30%, but they too are not saying they're going to freeze them. They're not saying that they're going to hold them over the next number of years. And so how long before those rates come back up? I think the issue is not so much that. The issue is the inequality of that system. What we've said is that we're going to make the OSAP system fair for all. And we're going to raise the limit for which families qualify for OSAP.
To what limit would you
Well,
raise it?
we're actually going to double it now. And so families to $160,000, we think that when you take a two-income family, that is not very high. And those families are now excluded from actually applying for OSAP. We think that we have to increase that limit and make OSAP much more available. The important issue here is not so much the debt as the fact that when young people graduate, they don't have a job to go to. And I think that's the issue. And that's why we're saying we're going to ensure that our economy is such that jobs can in fact and will be created so that young people have a job to go to. We're also, as you mentioned, we're going to increase the apprenticeship spaces that will be available, some 200,000. I think our entire education system has been skewed for the last number of years in trying to focus young people into academia when many of them would prefer to follow a trade through an apprenticeship program, but they haven't been available. We're going to ensure that that changes. Opportunity is what young people want, and we want to ensure that they have that opportunity.
One of the things you've mentioned in different debates is that people have had to leave the province to get jobs as carpenters, electricians, and so on and so forth. By expanding the apprenticeship program, isn't that a bit of a contradiction? If there's no jobs in the province for these people and they have to leave, by creating 200,000 new positions, you're going to have to make very sure that you create those 200,000 jobs.
Actually, Bruce, I haven't made reference to people having to leave to find carpenter and electrician jobs and plumbing jobs and bricklaying jobs. I've referred to people who have had to leave to find a job as a medical doctor or as a nurse because those jobs aren't available here. We are importing plumbers and bricklayers from overseas. That's the problem. There are a lot of opportunities in this province.
So it's more the skilled laborers the skilled professions that you're saying.
Precisely. And that in itself, you see, on that count, we're training doctors and nurses here, and what happens because of our system that we have here, those people are having to find positions in Manitoba and British Columbia and other provinces. That's fundamentally wrong. But that's another issue. Why are there not more internship positions being made available in the province of Ontario?
And what one of your policy statements says that you would work with the regulatory bodies to recognize foreign doctors and people like that. Is that true?
Yes. The fact is that we do have people here in York Region. You know, I've said to someone just last week, one of the quickest ways to get a doctor in York Region is to call 967-1111. We've got medical doctors trained in, not in third world countries, but in Great Britain who are here and they can't get accredited to practice. They can't even get accredited to practice as a nurse here or in a supportive role. That's fundamentally wrong, and I'll tell you what the problem is. It's not their credentials, it's not their ability, it's the barrier that the College of Physicians and Surgeons and the Canadian Medical Association have put up. That's where the focus has to be, and we're committed to doing that. We're not lowering standards. No one's talking about making it easier for foreign-trained professionals to practice here. We're saying we need to ensure that we maintain the standards, the professional standards, but let's not put artificial barriers up to keep these people from actually practicing in their field of discipline.
Okay. Two more things I want to touch on before we let you go. Number one is the GO Transit and the traffic gridlock. Everyone seems to agree to 7-day GO train service. In a recent statement issued by the Liberals, you were accused of a Johnny-come-lately on the GO Transit scene. In one of the Rogers TV debate, you referred to a number of issues you had before your government was defeated, before the legislature that was approved but never implemented. Before we get to that, perhaps let's just let you explain that legislation and your position on GO Transit, just to clear the air on that.
It's quite bizarre for me to be accused of being a Johnny-come-lately on the GO train service or on transit. The reality is, and my Liberal opponent should inform herself of what the facts were. As Minister of Transportation, I was the one who signed that initial check of $50 million that gave birth to the Viva Transit system here in this region. With regard to all-day GO train service, we had a list of priorities when I was the minister back in 2002 that included a number of transit and transportation initiatives that when the Liberals came into office in 2003, they disappeared. More frequent GO train service to York Region was one of them. The extension of the 404, the construction of the Bradford bypass across the northern part of York Region, that was off. The extension of the 427, the extension of the 407 East. None of those priorities that were front and center in our list of priorities were followed through on. Somehow they got shelved and they've been gathering dust. Interesting now. Again, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before another election, we have this announcement from the McGuinty government. I have been consistently lobbying for that more frequent GO train service. What we're not hearing from the McGuinty Liberals is anything to do with how they're going to do this. There's nothing about a timetable. They're making this announcement in Hamilton, I just heard yesterday. They're making that announcement here. They're not telling us how they're going to identify the priority list of how that is going to be achieved. I think when the people of Newmarket and Aurora, and quite frankly across the GTA in this province, listen to the kind of promises that are being rolled out by Dalton McGuinty, they will remember that they've heard all this before. They'll remember listening to a Dalton McGuinty who made some more than 200 promises coming into the 2003 election that he broke. They'll remember that he said, "I won't raise your taxes" in 2003. And then we got the health tax, but they didn't call it a health tax, they called it a health premium, and we're still paying that. And then in the 2007 election, he promised, "I won't raise your taxes." And within months, we had a $3.1 billion HST plus the eco-taxes. Bruce, there are so many things that Dalton McGuinty, the McGuinty Liberals have promised without even thinking twice about whether or not they actually can deliver it, and they have failed to deliver. I don't believe that anyone is believing Dalton McGuinty, and I don't think they'll believe his candidate here either.
Okay, that brings me to my next question and the next topic, and that's the Green Energy Act and everything that goes along with that. Your party has been painted by the others, not only the Liberals, as being somewhat anti-green. You advocate an energy mix, and what we're seeing right now, and these two topics tie in together. The strengthening local communities and the energy mix. And by that, then I'll let you elaborate. By that, I'm referring to what's going on in the rural communities around Ontario with the wind farms. Recently, as you're probably well aware, Suncor has been sued for $1.5 million by a couple in Thamesville, Ontario. The municipalities, rural municipalities, 80 of them are complaining about these wind farms being imposed on them against the wishes of the local municipalities. On top of which, green energy is being supplemented at 80 cents a liter and 40 cents a liter, and that's being tacked on to our hydro bills. The offshore wind farms, that company is now suing the provincial government for $2.25 billion. Having said that, the Mississauga power plant has now been, during the election, that has been relocated to where we don't know. There are examples of flip-flops that I feel obligated to bring up. Having said that, let's have your view on those issues as well as explaining your policy on a green energy mix.
I'm glad that, that you raised this issue. And first of all, let me talk about the green energy and the accusations that we as a party, or that I, do not support green energy or the environment. Bruce, one of my legacies, of which I'm very proud, is that I was one of 2 MPPs in the PC caucus who advocated for the Oak Ridges Moraine Protection Act. Neither the NDP government nor Liberal governments before brought forward legislation. They had some guidelines. We brought legislation that protects now permanently thousands of acres of environmentally sensitive land from the threats of development for generations to come. That's my legacy. No one can teach me about sensitivity to the environment. And the same is true with regard to the green energy. We support green energy. We think that we should capitalize on solar and wind and biomass. We should encourage some additional hydro generation through the various smaller rivers that we have in the province of Ontario, and there are many of them. But we also know that if we're going to sustain a strong economy, we need a reliable and affordable source of energy, and that's why we're also committed, as part of that energy generation mix, to include nuclear, and of course our standby, our long-standing, the cleanest form of energy that we have is hydroelectric. It has to be a total mix. You know, the most ardent environmentalists who are informed will admit that the most that Ontario could ever generate through renewables is about 18% of our supply mix. The rest of it has to have a good solid base that includes natural gas generation. So what we will do, we'll stop this subsidizing, as you mentioned, to the tune of 15 times the conventional cost of generating electricity, what is going on through this feed-in tariff program or the FIT program. We're going to stop that. We're not stopping green energy. We're going to stop the unsustainable subsidization of the McGuinty plan, which is an unsustainable experiment. So we're going to stop that. We're going to call for open, competitive tenders for anyone who wants to get into the solar or wind energy. Here is the other aspect of what the McGuinty government has done to municipalities right across this province. They have essentially taken away from local municipalities the right to make a decision about whether they want wind turbines in their backyards. As a result, communities across this province are losing their quality of life, there are threatened health issues, and municipal governments are left wringing their hands because they're no longer empowered to even make that decision, because the Green Energy Act overrides local municipal decision making. We're going to restore local decision making for councils on the green energy, on the energy issue, as well on planning issues. And Bruce, this is a perfect segue into what's happening in Newmarket today, in the Glenway community. Because again, it is the McGuinty government that is responsible for the threat to the Glenway community to have that community intensified with an additional 750 housing units. I hear people talk about, well, the issue is the Ontario Municipal Board. No, here's the problem. In 2005, the McGuinty government passed a piece of legislation called the Places to Grow Act. That act requires intensification. The McGuinty government justified it on the basis we don't want urban sprawl. And so on a go-forward basis, wherever possible, we want existing urban boundaries to be infilled. Whether that's single-family homes or condominiums or multiple-unit but you have to infill wherever possible. It is that piece of legislation that is now threatening the Glenway community. And by the way, the local council has no control over this. They'll oppose it. But the reason the developer was willing to pay multi-millions of dollars for that property without requiring a condition of rezoning is because the developer knows all about the Places to Grow Act. And the developer knows this. The local council will oppose it. It will automatically be uploaded to the Ontario Municipal Board for their decision. And guess what? The Ontario Municipal Board will have no choice but to approve intensification in that community because they have to be guided by provincial legislation in all of their decisions. The Places to Grow Act forces the Ontario Municipal Board to decide in favor of the developer. And so what's the answer? The PC government will restore decision-making authority to local councils with regard to their official plan so they can actually make those decisions and protect their communities, both on the planning issues such as Glenway is facing, as well as energy issues such as many municipalities across this province are facing with the influx of wind turbines and so on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. We really do appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers do. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you.